Picture this. The air is a blade, so cold it feels solid in your lungs. You lie perfectly still, wrapped in a coarse white shroud that scratches at your skin and smells of damp stone and finality. You cannot shiver. You cannot flinch. You cannot even allow the tremor of a half-drawn breath to betray you, because to move is to die. Through the rough weave of the linen you can hear them, the crunch of heavy boots on frosted ground, the low murmur of soldiers' voices, words snatched away by the wind. They are hunting you. They are searching for a living, breathing queen, not a cold, stiff corpse being carried out of a besieged castle. Every sway and jostle as the guards carry your bier threatens to shatter the illusion. Your heart hammers against your ribs, a frantic drumbeat that feels loud enough to echo across the frozen landscape. You are the rightful Queen of England, the designated heir to the throne, and yet here you are, reduced to a piece of human cargo, a ghost in your own kingdom. This is the story of that desperate gamble. The moment Empress Matilda had to become a corpse to survive, all to escape the cousin who had stolen her crown and plunged a nation into the brutal darkness of civil war. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. To understand the woman who would one day wrap herself in a death shroud, you must first understand the world that forged her. She was not born for humility. She was born from the iron and fire of conquest. Matilda, born in the year 1102, was the daughter of King Henry I of England, and the granddaughter of the man who had seized that same kingdom with blood and ambition, William the Conqueror. Power was not just her birthright, it was the very marrow in her bones. In the cold stone halls of the Norman court, she learned early that a crown was a thing to be defended, and a kingdom was a beast that must be held by the throat, lest it turn and devour you. Her childhood was not a story of gentle nurturing. It was a lesson in political currency. At the tender age of 8, she was a pawn in a grand game, betrothed and sent away from England's shores. Her destination was the Holy Roman Empire, a sprawling, formidable power that dwarfed her father's kingdom. Her husband-to-be was its ruler, Emperor Henry V, a man more than twice her age. Imagine that journey. A small girl, leaving behind everything she had ever known, crossing the churning sea, and traveling for weeks through foreign lands where the language was a collection of harsh, unfamiliar sounds. The very air must have smelled different, thick with the scent of dark forests and strange foods. But Matilda was her grandfather's heir in spirit as well as blood. She did not wither in this alien environment. She thrived. She was crowned Queen of the Romans in a lavish ceremony, the weight of the gold and jewels on her head a constant reminder of her new station. She learned the languages, mastered the complex etiquette of the imperial court, and absorbed the art of governance at the elbow of one of Europe's most powerful men. This was her apprenticeship. While other girls her age were learning needlepoint, Matilda was learning how to command, how to negotiate, and how to rule. When her husband journeyed to Italy, he did not leave a placeholder behind. He left his young wife as his regent, a testament to her sharp mind and formidable character. For years, she was the Empress, a title that became fused with her identity, a symbol of a destiny she believed was rightfully hers. Then the first stone of her gilded world came loose. At 23, she was made a widow. The great emperor was dead, and suddenly she was an empress without an empire. Her father, King Henry, summoned her home to Normandy. But the home she returned to was a court cloaked in a grief so profound it seemed to poison the very air. Just a few years earlier, the greatest tragedy of their line had struck. Her brother William Adelin, the sole legitimate male heir to the English throne, had drowned in the icy waters of the Channel. The story was already a grim legend. A night of drinking and celebration aboard a vessel known as the White Ship had turned into a catastrophe. The ship, filled with the sons and daughters of the Anglo-Norman elite, struck a rock and went down with horrifying speed. They said the screams of the drowning could be heard from the distant shore. William Adelin had nearly escaped, but turned his lifeboat back for his half-sister, only to have his vessel swamped by others desperate to be saved. He vanished beneath the waves, and with him the future of the kingdom. King Henry, they said, never smiled again. His hope was gone. His line was broken. And so the grieving king did something unprecedented, something that sent a shockwave through the patriarchal bedrock of the 12th century. He summoned the barons of England, the hard, violent men who ruled the land with sword and fist, to his court. He stood before them, a king bowed by sorrow but still radiating an aura of absolute power, and he made them swear an oath. They would accept his daughter, the Empress Matilda, as his rightful successor. You have to imagine the tension in that hall. The air, thick with the smell of wood smoke and damp wool, would have crackled with unspoken dissent. These were warriors, men who believed a woman's place was in the birthing bed or the convent, not on the throne. A queen to lead them into battle, a woman to dispense justice. To them it was an affront to God and to nature. Yet before their king they bent the knee. One by one they placed their hands on holy relics and swore their fealty. And among them was a man named Stephen of Blois, Matilda's own cousin, his face a mask of solemn piety as he uttered the sacred words. It was a promise made in the shadow of death, a promise that would prove to be as brittle as winter ice. To further secure her position, Henry forced Matilda into a second marriage, this time to Geoffrey of Anjou. It was a loveless, political match. Geoffrey was a decade her junior, arrogant and ambitious, and their union was reportedly stormy and filled with conflict. But it served its purpose. Matilda, ever the pragmatist, endured it. She gave her father what he needed most, a grandson. The birth of her son, the future King Henry II, seemed to cement the succession. Now there was a male heir, a direct descendant to carry on the conqueror's line. When King Henry I finally died, Matilda was in Normandy with her husband and her young son. The path seemed clear. The oaths were sworn. The heir was born. She was the empress, the chosen successor, the mother of the future king. The throne of England was waiting. But across the Channel, the whispers of dissent that had filled the Great Hall years before were now growing into a roar of open rebellion. And her cousin Stephen, the man who had sworn on holy relics to uphold her right, was about to teach her the brutal truth of their world, that an oath to a woman was a thing easily broken. The news of her father's death came to her on a cold wind in Normandy. It was the message she had been awaiting for years, the signal that her life's true purpose was to begin. But grief is a disorienting fog, and for a time it clouded everything. King Henry III, the Lion of Justice, the formidable anchor of her world, was gone. The sorrow was real, a physical weight in her chest, but beneath it was the thrum of destiny. The oaths had been sworn. The path was clear. It was time to claim her inheritance. But distance, in the 12th century, was a treacherous void. A message that took weeks to cross the churning English Channel was an eternity, and in that eternity, treachery found fertile ground. While Matilda mourned and planned her crossing, her cousin Stephen of Blois moved with the speed of a striking viper. He was charming, affable, and well-liked by the barons. Everything the proud and often imperious Matilda was not. More importantly, he was a man, and he was there. He raced to England, his sails catching the same winter winds that carried the news of the king's death. He did not come as a mourner, but as a claimant. He landed on the shores of a kingdom adrift, a ship without a captain, and he offered himself as its new master. The barons, those same men who had sworn their souls to Matilda, were now faced with a choice. On one hand, a woman across the sea, a woman they viewed as foreign after her years as empress, a woman who threatened to upend the natural order of the world. On the other, a handsome, pious man of royal blood standing right before them, promising to uphold their lands and their ancient rights. Their sacred oaths, sworn on the bones of saints, melted away like frost in the morning sun. The promises they made to a dying king were worth less than the breath it took to speak them. They chose Stephen. The powerful city of London, a crucial centre of commerce and influence, hailed him as their king. His own brother, Henry of Blois, the influential Bishop of Winchester, secured the support of the church, arguing that the oath to Matilda had been sworn under duress and was therefore void. It was a flimsy excuse, a transparent veil for ambition, but it was enough. Picture the scene at Westminster Abbey. just a few weeks after the old king's death. The air is thick with the sweet, cloying scent of incense and beeswax. Light filters through the high-arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny spirits. Stephen, cloaked in robes of state, kneels before the altar. The Archbishop of Canterbury holds the crown of England aloft, a heavy circle of gold and gems, the very symbol of divine right. It is the crown that should have been Matilda's. As the Archbishop places it on Stephen's head, a great roar erupts from the assembled lords and bishops. Vivat Rex! Long live the king! The sound echoes through the stone vaults of the abbey, a deafening chorus of betrayal. The holy oil used to anoint him is a seal of legitimacy, a declaration that God himself has chosen this man. In that moment, Matilda is not just disinherited, she is erased. Her claim, her father's will, her entire future, all of it is nullified by a crown, a prayer, and a cheer. When the news finally reached Matilda in Normandy, it must have felt like a physical blow, knocking the very air from her lungs. It was a betrayal so profound, so absolute, it would have been difficult to even comprehend. This wasn't just a political maneuver. It was a wound inflicted by her own blood, Stephen, the cousin who had knelt beside the others, his hand on the same relics, his voice uttering the same sacred promise. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. He hadn't just broken an oath, he had stolen her life. The grief for her father curdled into something else entirely. It became a cold, hard stone of rage in her heart. The world she had been raised to command had been snatched away in a matter of weeks. Every lesson she had learned about power, every moment she had spent as empress ruling at her husband's side, now felt like a bitter mockery. She had been deemed unfit, not because of her experience or her lineage, but because of her womanhood. The humiliation was a fire, and it began to burn away her sorrow, leaving behind a core of pure, unyielding resolve. She was the daughter of the lion, the granddaughter of the conqueror. She would not be cast aside. The crown on Stephen's head was stolen property, and she would cross the sea and tear it from him if she had to. The cheering in the abbey had not been a coronation, it had been a declaration of war, and it was a war she intended to win. The war, when it came, was not a clean affair of noble banners and decisive battles. It was a sickness that seeped into the very soil of England. For nearly 2 decades the land bled. Historians would later call this period the Anarchy, and the name is a chillingly accurate one. It was a time when the bonds of society dissolved, when law and order became a fading memory. A chronicler of the time wrote that in these 19 long winters, Christ and his saints slept. It was a cancer on the land, where opportunistic lords built castles without license, torturing local men for their gold and silver, burning towns, and leaving fields fallow. Famine, a gaunt and silent spectre, stalked the countryside. For the common person, the question of who wore the crown in London was a distant abstraction. The only reality was the armed man at your door and the gnawing emptiness in your belly. This was the kingdom Matilda returned to in 1139. She did not come as a queen being welcomed by her people, but as an invader landing on a hostile shore. She established her foothold at Arundel Castle, and from there the poison of civil war spread. Brother turned against brother, father against son. The great families of England were forced to choose a side, and loyalty was a currency that could be spent and respent. Every victory was paid for in blood, and every defeat was marked by burned villages and salted fields. For Matilda, these were years of relentless, grinding struggle. She was a commander now, not just a claimant. She learned the brutal arithmetic of war, the cost of feeding an army, the strategic importance of a river crossing, the fragile morale of men who had been away from their homes for too long. The imperious pride that had been forged in the imperial court of Germany was now her armor. Some saw it as arrogance, a haughtiness that kept her from winning the hearts of the people she sought to rule. But perhaps it was a necessary fortress, a wall she built around herself to withstand the constant betrayals, the physical hardship, and the crushing weight of a cause that often seemed hopeless. Then, in the winter of 1141, the tide seemed to turn. At the Battle of Lincoln, her forces, led by her fiercely loyal half-brother Robert of Gloucester, achieved the impossible. They captured King Stephen, Imagine the moment. The chaos and clangor of the battlefield fade, and there he is, the usurper, the oath-breaker, his sword broken, his helmet knocked from his head, brought before her not as a king, but as a prisoner. It must have been a moment of exquisite, long-awaited vindication. The man who had stolen her crown was now her captive, bound in chains. The path to the throne was finally blessedly clear. She made her way towards London, the crown almost within her grasp. She was no longer just the Empress. She was declared Lady of the English, a title used in preparation for her official coronation. This was the pinnacle, the moment all the bloodshed had been for. But it was here, on the very doorstep of her triumph, that her unbending will became her fatal flaw. The citizens of London, wary of her reputation and crushed by Stephen's taxes, approached her to ask for a relaxation of the harsh levies. They were begging for mercy. But Matilda, it seemed, had forgotten how to be merciful. She had known only struggle for so long that compromise felt like weakness. She refused them, her tone cold and dismissive. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. The Londoners, who had been ready to accept her, were enraged by her arrogance. The city that was meant to crown her slammed its gates in her face. Church bells that were supposed to ring in celebration now rang in alarm, calling the militia to arms. She was forced into a humiliating retreat, fleeing the city as a furious mob pursued her. She had held the crown in her hand, and in a single moment of pride she had let it slip through her fingers. The psychological blow was immense. It wasn't an army that had defeated her. It was the very people she claimed to rule. They had looked upon their would-be queen and found her wanting. The retreat from London turned into a disaster. At the rout of Winchester, Stephen's loyalist forces, commanded by his formidable wife, Queen Matilda of Boulogne, counterattacked. Matilda's army was shattered. She herself barely escaped, forced into a desperate, undignified flight. But her protector, her strategist, the one man she trusted implicitly, her half-brother Robert of Gloucester, was captured while covering her retreat. The war had come full circle. Her greatest prize, King Stephen, was now her only bargaining chip to save her greatest ally. A prisoner exchange was arranged, Stephen for Robert. The king was freed, and Matilda was back where she started, only now her cause was weaker, her reputation damaged and her spirit battered. This led to the darkest chapter of her long ordeal, the siege of Oxford Castle in the winter of 1142. The castle was a formidable fortress, a stone fist rising from the flat, marshy landscape. But Stephen's forces surrounded it, cutting it off from the world. As autumn bled into the unforgiving cold of an English winter, Matilda found herself in a cage. The days bled into one another, each one marked by a shrinking food supply and a growing sense of despair. The wind howled through the arrow slits, a constant mournful sound. The air grew thick with the smell of sickness and unwashed bodies. Hope, which had once burned so brightly, was now a flickering ember. Imagine the psychological torment. Every morning she would look out from the battlements and see the enemy campfires, a ring of fire slowly strangling the life from her and her garrison. The soldiers grew gaunt, their faces hollowed out by hunger. The bread was gone, then the salted meat, then the horses. They were reduced to eating leather, to boiling their own belts for a meager, foul-tasting broth. The gnawing emptiness in their stomachs was matched only by the emptiness of their future. Matilda, the Empress, the Lady of the English, was trapped, starving, and facing the grim choice of surrender or death. To surrender meant the end of everything. It meant accepting that all the death, all the suffering, all the years of war had been for nothing. It meant kneeling before her cousin and admitting defeat. The landscape itself became an enemy. A heavy snow fell, blanketing the world in a pristine, silent white. It was beautiful, but it was a deadly beauty. It made any relief effort impossible and tightened Stephen's grip on the castle. The rivers and marshes around Oxford froze solid, creating a glittering, unbroken plain of ice. The world outside her stone prison was a frozen, dead thing. And it was in this moment of absolute frozen despair, when the last of the food was gone and the whispers of surrender grew louder in the halls, that the most desperate plan of her life was born. If the world outside was dead, then she would have to become a part of it. She would have to become a corpse. The plan was born of pure animal desperation. To stay was to die, either by starvation or by the executioner's axe. The only way out was to become invisible, to transform from a high-value target into something no one would look at twice. The snow that had been their jailer now offered the slimmest chance of becoming their salvation. It was a camouflage, a shroud provided by nature itself. The escape was to take place in the dead of night, under the cloak of a winter storm. Matilda and a handful of loyal knights wrapped themselves in white sheets. They were not just meant to blend with the snow. The illusion had to be complete. They were ghosts, phantoms slipping out from a dying fortress. They moved with a silence born of terror, their feet wrapped in cloth to muffle their steps on the crunchy, frozen ground. They were lowered down the towering stone walls of the castle on ropes, dangling between the world of the living and the embrace of the frozen earth below. The wind must have whipped their white cloaks around them, threatening to tear them from their precarious handholds, its howl a funeral dirge in their ears. Then came the most perilous part of the journey. They had to cross the frozen River Thames. It was a vast white expanse under the weak moonlight, a treacherous plain of ice that groaned and cracked under their weight. With every step, they risked plunging into the black, suffocating water beneath. They had to pass directly by Stephen's encampment. Imagine the sheer, heart-stopping tension. They could hear the coughs of the sentries, see the faint orange glow of the campfires, perhaps even smell the wood smoke on the frigid air. They were close enough to be discovered at any moment. This is where the story of her being carried as a corpse likely originates, either as a clever piece of propaganda to explain her miraculous escape, or as a literal description of her being borne on a litter, shrouded and still, to fool any distant observer. For 6 miles they walked, a line of white spectres against a white landscape, through the biting cold and the deep snowdrifts. 6 miles of pure adrenaline-fueled fear. They finally reached the town of Abingdon, where horses were waiting. They had done it. They had slipped through the enemy's grasp. Matilda, the woman who had been a starving prisoner just hours before, was free. It was a stunning, legendary feat of survival. But it was not a victory. The escape from Oxford was the symbolic end of her campaign in England. Though the war would sputter on for several more years, her spirit for the fight was broken. She had lost the momentum, and she had lost the will. In 1148, she finally left England's shores and returned to Normandy, never to set foot in the kingdom she had fought for again. She left the war for her son, Henry, to continue. Matilda lived for another 19 years in Normandy, returning to the role she knew so well, a ruler. She governed the duchy with a firm and capable hand, proving the very thing the English barons had denied, that a woman could in fact rule effectively. She never wore the crown of England, but she watched from across the sea as her son took up her cause, his youthful energy succeeding where her weary determination had failed. When Stephen died in 1154, it was her son, Henry Fitz-Empress, Henry, son of the Empress, who crossed the Channel. He was crowned King Henry II without opposition, beginning the long and powerful reign of the Plantagenet dynasty. In the end, Matilda did not win the throne, but she won the war. Her bloodline, not Stephen's, would rule England for the next 300 years. Her perseverance, her refusal to accept the injustice done to her, ensured that her legacy would endure through her children. Her epitaph carved on her tomb reads, "Great by birth, greater by marriage, greatest in her offspring. Here lies Matilda, the daughter, wife, and mother of Henry's." The story of her escape, wrapped in a death shroud against the snow, echoes through time as more than just a dramatic tale of survival. It is a powerful metaphor for her entire life. She was a woman forced to navigate a world that constantly sought to bury her claim, her ambition, her authority. She was pushed to the very edge of political and physical death, yet she found a way to endure, to slip through the cracks of a society that had no place for a woman like her. She had to become a ghost, a corpse, a non-entity, in order to survive and fight another day. Her story is a haunting reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of resilience are not fought on the battlefield with swords held high, but in the dead of night, wrapped in a shroud, taking one silent, terrifying step after another across a frozen, hostile world.